This edition of Mac Voices is sponsored by Smile, the makers of world-class software like PDF Pen for Mac, PDF Pen Pro for Mac, PDF Pen for iPhone and iPad, PDF Pen Scan Plus for iPhone and iPad, Text Expander for Mac, and Text Expander for iPhone and iPad. Learn more about all their great products at smilesoftware.com. And by Mac Voices Magazine, our free Flipboard magazine that brings you some of the best Mac, iPhone, and iPad productivity tips on the web. High in signal, low in noise, just like Mac Voices, Mac Voices Magazine includes information on how you can get more out of your Apple technology. Subscribe at macvoices.com/magazine or search for Mac Voices Magazine on Flipboard. Welcome to Mac Voices. This is a talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we're on a bit of a roll here with Take Control authors because there's a little bundle of Take Control books that has come out recently. Next up on this little trip is Mr. Josh Centers. Josh, welcome. It's good to have you.
Thanks for having me back, Chuck.
So, Josh, this one is Take Control of iOS 11?
Yes.
Got it. Okay, so first off, great. I mean, I love the fact that you're doing the Take Control books, and especially iOS 11 seems to have a bunch of new and very interesting features. But something else the folks should know is that up till now, you've been doing crash courses on iOS 11, and this is not.
Yeah, this is my fourth iOS book. I started back with iOS 8. And so far, they've all been crash courses. So it was like iOS 8, a Take Control crash course. Well, one of the first big decisions Joe Kissel made as publisher is we're getting rid of the crash course format. So a lot of the work I've put into this particular book has been converting it to the traditional Take Control format, which if you like that format, and it's a format a lot of people love, and it's been very successful over the years, then that's great news. And basically what that means, the difference between a crash course format and our traditional Take Control format, crash course was in two columns. And so you had text, the main text in the left column, and you'd have images and sidebars and such in the right column. The nice thing about Crash Course was it created very pretty, a very visual layout. It was attractive to look at. The big downside, at least for the reader, it was a problem for us because it was kind of a pain to work with production-wise. But if you're a reader, there's a lot of stuff I had to put into these books that just for filler, just because, something needs to be there, so let's just put something there. And so by switching to the traditional Take Control format, I can focus a lot more on the text. I can focus a lot more on what actually needs to be there and eliminate what doesn't. So this is going to be a book that has a lot of filler taken out. It's going to be a lot trimmer, but it's also going to be a better signal to noise ratio. There's going to be a lot more useful information and a lot less stuff that's just there just to look pretty or take up space.
Josh, I think I've asked you this question pretty much every time we do one of these Take Control ofs, a new version of iOS. But given that you've made this shift and you can do a lot more with it, a new approach to examining iOS 11, or is it pretty much the same approach and just expanding the coverage?
It's basically the same thing as before. Just the format's changed, but it's the same sort of book, so if you've been reading the iOS 8, iOS 9, iOS 10 books, it's not going to be shockingly different. A lot of the content, a lot of the classic content's still there, just updated for iOS 11. And there's a lot of stuff there's a lot of fundamental changes in iOS 11. So there's stuff you're going to want to pay attention to that you might think you know.
I like that you might think you know, but you really don't. Okay, so let's have some fun with this. What do you think is the most exciting part of, or changes or updates to iOS 11? New features?
Well, in terms of exciting, it depends on your definition of exciting. Do you consider exciting a good thing or a bad thing? Well,
that's a fair question. I was thinking good thing, but if you want to talk about bad.
Well, the good, exciting thing, it's all pretty good. I think it's a good update. But the good, exciting thing is iPad. Specifically, Apple has done a lot of tweaking onto the iPad, a lot of overhauling. So now you have the dock for the iPad is a lot more like the Mac dock. and multitasking has been refigured, so it's a lot more flexible. It's easier to switch windows around. That's what Apple's apparently calling these panes, is windows. It's easier to switch those around and easier to manipulate. And also the app switcher, instead of just being a bunch of cards, it takes up more advantage of the space. So when you pull up the app switcher now, you see more than just a handful of apps at a time. You see a whole bunch of little app windows, and you also see this new control center they have. So a lot of exciting stuff there in the iPad front, and it's going to make it. Well, I'll put it to you like this. My problem with the iPad as a productivity device is the apps I need aren't there. But for a lot of people, the apps you need are there. And so if you're the sort of person who everything you needed was in iOS already, you already had it in the iPad, and the only thing holding you back was that multitasking was kind of cumbersome, well, iOS 11 may be the update for you that truly turns the iPad into your main production device.
Is that something you wanted to see happen, Josh? Do you see the iPad becoming one of your main production devices?
I would like that. I mean, the more the merrier. I'm kind of wedded to the Mac now, and thankfully I have two Macs on hand. So if something goes south, I have a backup. But it's always good to have more diversity of devices. Especially the few times I actually travel. It'd be nice to just take the iPad with me and not have to lug around a laptop. But frankly, it's something. All this stuff I wish would happened about 5 years ago. I think Apple's way behind the curve here. But I am glad to see it, though. It's about time they started treating the iPad as its own thing instead of just a giant iPhone, which was always the joke, right? When Steve Jobs first announced iPad, everyone's like, "It's a giant iPhone," and of course, all of us in the Apple community are like, "No, it's its own thing." But honestly, it really just has been a giant iPhone up until now. Now things start getting a lot more interesting.
Well, definitely with the improvements to the multitasking and some of those things. My contention always was, if it came out and it was just a giant iPhone, fine. That would have been enough for me, at least at that point, simply because bigger screen means I can do more with it. I can see more, and that, to me, at least to some degree, translated into more productivity. But as we've seen things like split screen and those kind of things come to the fore, now it feels like it's definitely it's maturing. It's maturing.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking a lot about this for the iPad. How about for the iPhone? Because iOS encompasses both. Do you feel like that the iOS is becoming more of the iPhone is becoming more of a productivity machine?
Not really. I'm seeing it more as Apple is drawing a clear line in the sand between iPad and iPhone. And I'm not going to say that your iPhone can't be a productivity device. I can be very productive on iPhone, although usually it's the opposite of productive. But there are some big changes that affect both iPad and iPhone that are going to sort of a seismic shift in how you use iOS. Two I'm going to note here, because they're probably going to baffle you off the bat when you first install iOS 11. The first thing is that Notification Center is gone. Poof, it's gone. When you so in iOS 10, when you drag down from above the top of the screen, you pull down this thing called Notification Center. It has all your old notifications there. You can see missed messages and all that. Now in iOS 11, when you do that, it actually takes you back to the lock screen, or what Apple is now calling the cover sheet. So you pull down from there, and so all your old notifications are actually on the lock screen now. And when you unlock your iPhone, you can swipe up and you can scroll through a list of it. And it's kind of a weird change, but as a tech writer, it makes it a lot easier for me to describe it. And honestly, I think for end users, and usually when I find something's easier for me to describe, it's a lot easier for a user to figure out. So now instead of having these two things that had a lot of overlap, now you have one unified interface. The other big change is the control center. For years, people have asked for a control center that could be customized, that had more features. And of course, in iOS 10, Apple introduced a 2 to 3 pane control center. It's 2 panes for most people, and then a third pane if you have HomeKit accessories. Well, in iOS 11, they've shrunk it back down to 1 pane, but it's totally redesigned. It's lots of little buttons and icons, and you can customize these. And there's a lot more new controls in Control Center. For instance, my personal favorite, I also wrote the Apple TV book, is that there is an Apple TV button in Control Center now that you can enable. And you can press and hold on that, and it'll open a miniature Siri remote from Control Center, and you can control your Apple TV with that. So, it finally answers, it's finally the dream I've always had of being able to control my Apple TV with my iPhone without unlocking the phone. Now I can pull Control Center, press this button, and then I got the Siri remote right there. So, and that's something I go into detail in the book. I have an entire chapter about the new Control Center, entire chapter about the new lock screen and how you use that. And I also document in the book all the different Control Center functions. And there's a lot there that may surprise you. For instance, there's one that's brand new to iOS, and that's screen recording. There is a button you can add to Control Center where you can record all of your on-screen actions to a video, which is really nice for us tech writers, but it can also be helpful for anyone who needs help diagnosing a problem or, all sorts of different creative uses for this sort of thing. But it's another, totally new thing, part of this new redesigned Control Center that you're going to want to read about for the book.
MacVoices is sponsored by Smile, the makers of world-class software for the Mac and iOS. Find out about all their amazing utilities and how they can make you more productive at smilesoftware.com. Text Expander is perhaps my most used productivity utility, and for someone who spends a lot of time at the keyboard, that says something. You probably already know that at its most basic level, Text Expander lets you type a few keystrokes, known as a snippet, and have it automatically type in pretty much any text you want. Names, dates, email signatures, boilerplate language, pre-prepared replies to customer inquiries, even programming code if that's your need. But Text Expander is so useful in so many ways that you might not realize it at first, and the folks at Smile want you to get the most out of it. So they periodically post tips and tricks to their blog at smilesoftware.com/blog. One of the most recent postings pointed out how you can use Text Expander to fix those frequent typos that you make, and how you can eliminate double capitals at the beginning of a sentence or even a word. They also explain autocorrect groups that can be downloaded from their site for free that give you powerful automatic spelling correction, Text Expander style. Those are just a few more ways that Text Expander not only improves the quantity of your work, but also the quality of your work. That's why you should make Text Expander work for you. Do yourself a favor right now and go to smilesoftware.com and download the trial version of Text Expander to find out what it can do for you and your productivity. Or just skip to the head of the class and buy Text Expander from Smile at smilesoftware.com and supercharge your productivity right away. That's Text Expander from Smile, the makers of world-class software at smilesoftware.com. Thanks to Smile for their support of MacVoices. Josh, how do you feel about the overall look of iOS 11? I guess it was 9 that introduced the thin fonts, and there was a lot of controversy that kind of came back out. Do you see a lot of design changes, or is it primarily functional? And some of what you're saying, I realize you could probably categorize as design, but for the most part, I consider those functional changes. Right.
So it doesn't look that much different than iOS 7, but there are some key differences aesthetically. I'll start with one I hate, and I'm hoping that changes before the final release. But in one of the late betas, they changed the App Store icon from the classic paintbrush and pencil lined up. Now it looks like, I don't know, 3 hot dogs floating in water, popsicle sticks. I couldn't tell you, but I really don't like the icon. And I'm not usually one of those guys that's prissy over app icons, but the new App Store icon, I just find to be hideous. The other big aesthetic change, and this started in iOS 10 with the music and news apps, is this new look of big bold text for a header, and then to let you know what window you're in, and then stuff underneath. And that's extended in iOS 11. So now mail, messages, and so forth have that big, bold text look, which I generally like because it looks good, but also it's very accessible. It's very clear and large and bold. So, people who don't have the best vision can easily see that stuff. So I think that's a good thing. Other big aesthetic change, the control center looks very, very different because it's kind of this funky jumble of buttons now. It looks a lot different than it used to be. Aesthetically, I'm not so sure I like that, but functionally, it works very well. But overall, I don't find the aesthetics of iOS 11 to be terribly shocking. They're very much an evolution of iOS 10's aesthetics. So, it's basically, it's not going to be anything that's just going to, oh, wow, this looks totally alien, totally different. It's very much the progression Apple has been on since Johnny Ive took over the software end of design.
Great word, progression. And, and I think, candidly speaking, at least from where I sit, I think there have been a couple little missteps along the way. The thin fonts were a big one, especially for a mobile device where the screen is, but no matter how gorgeous it is, it's still, small and thin, and you're using it out in a lighted environment. And so, that can be problematic. But I do feel like, recently the changes I'm seeing to everything have slid a little more back toward the practical. They're still pretty much just as elegant looking, but they have a little bit more of a nod to the productivity, and I really like that.
Yeah, things aren't quite as wispy as they were back in iOS 7. That they've thickened up a lot of the text, especially in terms of the headers and such. But things are a lot easier to read. This new San Francisco, well, it's not really new anymore, but the San Francisco font, I think, has generally been highly successful both on iOS and the Mac. So it very much is an improvement. But, like I said, it's not, if you compared it side by side to iOS 7, it wouldn't be terribly shocking. But, if you look at through iOS 7 up through 11, there's very much a clear progression there. There's nothing. The control center looks kind of weird. You'll get used to it after a while, but I think that's the one thing that might shock people at first. But overall, I doubt most people won't even notice that much of a change.
So you talked a little bit about the couple of the chapters that you have in the book. What are some of the other chapters? What are some of the other areas that you felt justified in devoting a whole chapter to?
Right. So if you're used to the other books in the series, a lot of the same chapters are there. One of the things I always pride myself on with these books is the What's New chapter, which is the first chapter in the book. And I try to make the most comprehensive changelog, user-friendly changelog. There are some developer changelogs, which, you have to have an engineering degree to really understand. But I think this is one of the biggest benefits of the book, and of all these books, where if you just want to know in a straightforward way what is new in iOS 11, Apple won't tell you. Apple will tell you some things that are new, and they will honestly, they will misrepresent certain things to give you an idea of what they are. I'll give you an example of that. So one of these features Apple has talked about a lot is instant markup, and they try to make it sound like it's an iPad Pro only thing, and it's something where, you touch your pencil to the screen and you just mark things up. But that's not quite how it works, and it's not an iPad only feature. It's in a lot of places. It's activated in different ways. For instance, here's something that'll change. If you're the kind of person that takes a lot of screenshots, and if you are, you probably already have the beta installed, so you know about this. But if you do tend to take screenshots, a new thing is you'll see a thumbnail preview of it in the lower left corner of the screen, and you can actually tap on it and do markup on it and edit it, and then either save or discard it. So that's something that's new, and that's really what instant markup is. So in previous versions of iOS, I think going back to 8 or maybe 9, Mail had a markup feature where you could tap on an attachment in Mail, and the little pop-up or pop-over would come up, and you could tap markup, and you had a lot of the same tools that you had in the preview app for Mac. Well, now Apple has wisened up and they've extended that to different apps. And usually you access that through the share sheet by tapping the little share icon. But there are some different ways of doing that. And some apps, you can touch your Apple Pencil to the screen and do that. But for the most part, you have to do something on the screen to get yourself in that position. For instance, in Safari, you tap the share icon and you tap Markup as PDF. And that lets you save a web page as a PDF, and then you can scribble away on it all you like. So that's an example of, when you hear Apple's description of instant markup, it sounds very different than that. They make it sound like, oh, well, if you've spent all this money for an Apple iPad Pro and an Apple Pencil, you just scribble on the screen. It doesn't quite work that way. Another one is Instant Notes. And so this is a feature, and it does work like how Apple says it does. If you have an iPad Pro and an Apple Pencil, you tap the pencil to the screen. Sometimes you have to do it twice, and you get a note that you can scribble in instantly without having to unlock the device. But what they don't tell you in their own notes and their own marketing materials, I should say, is that you can also do this from the iPhone. You can do it from an iPad that isn't a Pro iPad. And the way you do that, and again, this is where this new control center is so interesting. You add a notes button to Control Center, which that's in settings. I explain how to do that in the book. And so from the lock screen, you can pull up Control Center, tap Notes, and it will create those instant notes for you. So you don't have to have an Apple Pencil to access that feature. So in terms of the chapters, the one I always really dive into more than anything else is the what's new. And I describe because a lot of this stuff you can describe in a few paragraphs and just kind of as you go along. And so that's one chapter in particular. If you buy this book, I think that's really the first thing you should go to, because it's going to tell you everything that's new, and I'll tell you how to use that feature right then and there. And if I can't, I'll shuffle you off somewhere else. I do have a section in the book all about the markup stuff. That's in the sharing chapter. So since a lot of it was kind of weird trying to figure out where to put the markup stuff, because it wasn't quite big enough for its own chapter, but it didn't really fit anywhere else. So I was like, well, I'll put it in the sharing chapter, because a lot of times you access this instant markup capability by tapping the share button. So it makes as much sense as anything to put it there. So that's really the big thing. In terms of the other chapters, I have a whole chapter on lock screen, Control Center, the home screen, Spotlight, the app switcher, because that's something that's changed a lot. Speaking to Siri, and there's some different things with Siri I discussed there. A whole chapter on keyboards. And there's also some important stuff there in terms of keyboards. There's a new password feature. There's a one-handed typing feature. The iPad has some different – well, actually, there's a special chapter for iPad. And so I should mention that real quick. So because I'm kind of rambling on here. So I've split out a whole separate chapter just for special iPad features. And it talks about things like Instant Notes, the new dock, the new multitasking features, picture-in-picture, that's been there, the new drag and drop features, which we haven't really touched on yet, and also some of the special new keyboard features that are just for the iPad. And so I've put, it's always kind of bugged me. Over time, Apple's added certain things that were true for the iPad but not true for the iPhone. And it was always kind of hard juggling that. And with this update, they really, I feel like, made a clear distinction between iPhone and iPad, enough so that it made sense to create a whole chapter about just iOS 11 with the iPad. And so now I've done that. I think it helps make the rest of the text clearer, because I can always say, well, this works a little differently on the iPad. Here's where I discuss that in the book. So that's another one. If you're an iPad fan, you want to know, well, it's new in the iPad. After you check out what's new, you'll want to jump to that special iPad features chapter, and that's going to go into a lot of detail about some of this new stuff.
You bring up drag and drop, which I can't believe we didn't get to it. We sort of glanced over it as we were going through productivity. How do you find that works? Because I can say this as sort of a member of the audience. I have not installed any of the betas. I've seen some of the videos, of course, but that's about all. Do you feel like it's gone far enough? Do you feel like it's really a beneficial feature, or has it been put there just to satisfy the people that keep screaming about it?
it's a tough question to answer, is because it's going to really depend on how developers use their new capabilities for their apps for this. But I mean, so far it has a lot of promise. It works with most on-screen elements. For instance, if you're looking at a web page and you see an image you like, you can drag and drop it to the Photos app, you can drag and drop it to the Notes app, or you can drag and drop a web link to a note, or so. And it seems to work mostly off the back-end copy and paste functionality. So it's pretty seamless. There are some things I wish I could drag and drop that don't quite work yet. But overall, it has a lot of promise, but it's one of those things I have to put an asterisk there and just say it's going to depend on how developers take advantage of it. So far, I haven't found it terribly useful, but then again, I'm also one of those, I'm not one of the people who really gets a lot of productivity on my iPads for day-to-day use. I've used it some. I haven't found it necessarily better than copying something from one thing and pasting it into something else. But, it's one of those things over time. We'll just have to see how that goes and see how developers take advantage of it. But it is an exciting capability to offer.
Yeah, no question. And again, it's part of the iOS evolution. So, and that includes developers. Developers are going to have to look at this. We also have the issue of legacy apps here that probably are not going to be supported in iOS 11 moving forward. So you may lose some favorites, or you may lose some cruft. And the folks that are keeping the people obviously that are keeping it up are going to be the ones that incorporate drag and drop along with all the other assets that iOS 11 gives them.
Right, and that's something important to note for people before they install this, is that 32-bit apps will no longer work. And on TidBITS, we have an article. You may have to search back a little bit, but we talk about that. We talk about how to figure out which apps will no longer work when you upgrade. So it's going to be sort of an unfortunate situation for people who depend on, and these apps don't necessarily have to be that old, but if it's been a while since they've updated, or even some apps, they stay updated, but for whatever reason they haven't bothered updating it to 64-bit, which my understanding isn't all that easy. You'll no longer have that app unless the developer does something. So that's something to know beforehand, something to research on.
Josh, up to this point in Sierra, and I think at least one version before that, when you went through the process of installation or upgrading, the Mac OS would compartmentalize non-compatible software. Mm-hmm. What happens in iOS 11? Do the apps just disappear? Do they get compartmentalized, or do they just lay there until you try them and you have to delete them?
Yeah, my understanding is I don't have any of my test devices right now, so that's a good question to ask before I get this manuscript out. I need to make sure that my understanding is that it will stay on the device, but it just won't launch. I think it gives you an error message like can no longer open this, and then you have to go delete it. And I guess the reason Apple did that, they didn't want to be rude. They didn't want to just kick your apps off, but they'll just politely let you know, look, this doesn't work anymore. So if you have data in some of those older apps, you want to make sure you have that exported before you update, or you could be stuck in a very unfortunate situation.
That's great advice. And I would probably throw in there as well that, if you have the option to back up your device, but also make sure that you do one last upgrade pass on all of your apps before you decide to go to iOS 11. That way, any developers were straggling and got something out there at the last minute. Because you're right, that could be really bad if you have an app sitting there with really important data and it won't open.
Well, developers have had about a year to prepare for this. So unfortunately, because Apple started saying, I think at last WWDC, they're like, don't make any more 32-bit apps. Trust us. Don't just. In fact, I think they started rejecting them unless you start updating. So they've had about a year to prepare. So I'm going to assume that if you have an app that isn't 64-bit yet, it's probably not going to get updated. So probably best thing is to any apps that you really depend on, And before you update, just make sure. And if you have to migrate, go ahead and take care of that, because the way Apple usually does this, you might have a day or two, but usually shortly after release, they will stop signing the previous version of iOS, and then there's no way to go back after that. So, I mean, until they do that, there's a way to go back. You have to wipe your device and kind of force it through iTunes. But I mean, you can do it, but you have a very limited window of opportunity there. And of course, another good thing to do, if you have this as an option, if you have a test device around, if you have an older device you can install iOS 11 on, you can, put it on there, put your apps on there on that older device, on that test device, and then make sure everything works. That's always an ideal way to do it. But of course, not everyone, has access to that sort of thing.
And not everybody would bother to do it either.
Right.
We all just, we'll hit the button and hope. And Apple does a pretty darn good job of most of the time you're okay. But some of this may be beyond their control, because if it's not built for it, they've given the developers as much warning as possible. Hopefully the developers have given their customers as much warning as possible if for some reason they haven't been able to update it. So that sounds like that could be potentially the biggest gotcha in the upgrade, and it could be a pretty nasty one.
Yeah, my understanding is there are quite a few apps that that people still use that could, let's see. Oh, the article on TidBITS, it's called the problem with abandoned apps. So if you look that up on TidBITS or Google or whatnot, then you can find that. And he lists, let's see. It was Marc Zeedar who wrote that. And so he lists some of the apps he uses that will be deprecated. Task Paper is one. I know some people like to use that. Let's see. Reddit browser, if you still use that. Like, none of this stuff seems AIM. If you still use AIM for some reason, that's PS Touch, Photoshop Touch. That's been deprecated. TeamViewer. So some of these apps I recognize. I'm not sure. Yeah. I'm not sure if I use them in a while. So, important thing to note: if there is anything you use there, and even if Apple weren't doing this, it would be a good idea to migrate anyway, because once developers stop updating an app, it's only a matter of time before it stops working. So you really want to find an alternative.
Yeah. And I'll make sure I have a link in the show notes to that, folks, so you don't have to even Google it. Just go to MacVoices.com, look for this episode, and it'll be there for you. Josh, I want to make sure we touch on exactly what kind of book this is, because iOS 11 is not out, yet you've released Take Control of iOS 11. And you and Joe and I believe Shali have kind of tried to work ahead a little bit.
Yeah, so this is going to be a preliminary release, and we've done stuff kind of like this before. We'll release like a one-page book, and it's sort of like back, was it 1977 when they didn't have the Star Wars toys ready and you could buy your kid a little cardboard thing that said, "Oh, you'll get this in May," or whenever. So we kind of do a deal like that. No, this is going to be the full book, with the caveat that it's not 100% finished yet. I mean, we've gone through and fact checked. We've done all the usual editing steps, but until Apple actually releases the software update, there may be some day one changes from the betas that we did not anticipate. There may be some developer things that come up that we couldn't really test beforehand. I'll give you an example. Right now, as we're discussing this, one feature I have not been able to play with yet is person-to-person Apple Pay. It just has not been implemented. And my assumption is that they're going to release it as an app in the iMessage App Store on the day and date of release or shortly thereafter. Another feature that Apple promised, and it was in the early betas and now has been removed, is messages in the cloud, which will store your iMessages in iCloud, so it'll help things sync a little smoother. I tested all that. I wrote about it, and now it's all gone. And so I had to temporarily remove that from the book because I can't guarantee that it's going to work the same way once Apple re-implements it. So, and we're not quite sure when that's going to come back. So here's the deal: you buy this book. And day and date, or shortly thereafter, we're going to probably update it. That will be a free update for you. And as iOS 11 changes, we will keep updating the book. And those, I believe, will all be free updates for you, the reader. And the reason we're doing this was a few reasons. First of all, Apple hasn't really cared about NDAs in years. Some people still get really upset about it. Like I'll report about something for TidBITS for iOS 11, and someone will say, you should be a man of your word. You signed an NDA. I'm like, guys, no one cares. Every other Apple site on the internet is already talking about this stuff. Apple is already talking about this stuff. Apple has already released videos showing how to use some of the new iOS 11 features, and that's just and also a lot of people they have the public betas now. I mean, anyone listening to this right now, if iOS 11 has not been released yet, you can go sign up for the public beta and you can install it on your device. There's nothing stopping you. You don't have to pay any fee. It's out there if you want it, and right now it's pretty stable. So there's not necessarily anything wrong with doing that if you're the brave type. So we just felt like it's more important than ever. We can't just wait for day and date anymore. We have to get out a little sooner and just kind of ride by the seat of our pants and get it updated after the fact, because I mean, the fact is, before day one, people are going to be downloading the public betas. They're going to be reading articles on other websites and on TidBITS, because I've written a few myself, and they're going to know all this stuff. So we got to get the book out before everything's spoiled, and also so you can prepare yourself. And this is a nice thing about releasing it early, is you can go ahead and read the book and say, well, do I want to install this right away? Does this actually look attractive? Nah, maybe I should hold off. I have some 32-bit apps I need to check on, all that. So it kind of lets you prepare mentally. And, so if you think this new control center is going to flummox you, if you think the way notifications work is going to puzzle you, then you can kind of read up. You can get used to it, so there's no surprises on day one. So there's just it's a total 360 win all around. We beat some other people to the punch. I don't think Apple's really going to care. And you can buy the book beforehand, and you can be up to date on day one and hit the ground running.
I have mixed feelings about this. It bugged me for a while that back in June, July, you were seeing all these articles about, iOS 11 will do this, and they were based on early betas, and there was no guarantee any of the stuff was going to be in or working the way they were describing. Mm-hmm. Now we're a whole lot closer, and it feels like this stuff is justified, because you're right. The day I hit the upgrade button, that afternoon, I'm going to want to start using those features. Mm-hmm. And the only way to do that is to start to get familiar with them. And so, the articles on TidBITS and some other places, but this is clearly a place where you can go with someone who has spent a lot of quality time with all the betas, tested stuff, and you also can know that if something changes between now and when the actual release happens, there'll be an update to the book coming very quickly that will tell you exactly how it really does work.
Yeah, and I've spent, let's see, they first came out in June. I never could get Beta 1 to work, but since Beta 2, I've been using this on, let's see, an iPhone 6, an iPhone 7 Plus, a brand new 10.5-inch iPad Pro, and an iPad Air. So I've had several months of experience. So I have probably the most experience outside of Apple with this beta, and on several different devices. So, you can learn from my hard-won wisdom about this. And I've updated and had to rewrite a lot of these sections of the book as summer has progressed. So every time they come out with a new beta, I have to go look through everything and, see what's changed. And then, I have to go update the book, all that. So, I've steeped in iOS 11 history at this point.
Well, the book is Take Control of iOS 11. Mr. Josh Centers, TakeControlBooks.com, of course. Go get it if you are interested in taking advantage of iOS 11 right out of the gate, day one, and you will continue to get updates to the book. And if not, then maybe you want to wait until it actually gets out, and then you will use it side by side with your iOS device to get the most out of it. Josh, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. We don't do it enough. Got to get you back for something else. I'm sure there's one or two other topics we can cover.
Oh, there's always something, Chuck. Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's always good. Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. I'm looking forward to iOS 11. I hope you are too. I know Josh's book will help me get up to speed faster on it. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes, links to subscribe, and to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, SoundCloud, the MacVoices blog, the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter, and on MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard that helps you do more with your Apple tech. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.